The date is December 7th, 1941. America has just been dragged into the most devastating conflict the world has ever known. From the skies above Pearl Harbor to the jungles of New Guinea, the Pacific is about to become a vast, living battlefield. 2 years later, in the fading light over the Solomon Islands, a Japanese airfield commander gathers his pilots. His voice is firm but uneasy. "If you see the twin-boom fighter with red tips," he warns, "do not engage. Turn away immediately." The men nod, but their faces reveal something deeper: fear. For months, pilots of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service have whispered about a single American ace who seems untouchable. A phantom in the sky who strikes from nowhere and vanishes into the clouds before anyone can fire back. They call him the Ghost. But this ghost has a name: Richard Ira Bong, a quiet farm boy from Wisconsin with a boyish grin and a gift for flight unlike anything his instructors had ever seen. He didn't fit the Hollywood image of a warrior. He wasn't loud, brash, or boastful. Yet, by the end of the war, he would become the deadliest fighter pilot America had ever produced, 40 confirmed kills, all earned in the brutal air battles of the Pacific. This is his story, the rise of a man whose calm, courage, unmatched discipline, and devotion to his comrades turned him into a legend both feared and respected across enemy lines. But legends are never born overnight, and before Richard Bong became the ace of aces, he was just a young man from a dairy farm, staring up at the sky and wondering how far a dream could really take him. Long before the Pacific skies echoed with the roar of P-38 lightnings, there was the quiet hum of wind across a Wisconsin pasture. Richard Bong was born in 1920 in the small farming community of Poplar, a place where hard work was life and the horizon seemed to stretch forever. He was the eldest of 9 children, the kind of boy who mended fences one day and spent the next building model airplanes from scrap wood. Neighbors remembered him as polite, quiet, but always looking up eyes, tracing every biplane that passed overhead. When a barnstormer once performed a slow roll over Poplar, young Bong stood motionless, mesmerized. From that day on, he wasn't just watching planes, he was studying them. By the late 1930s, the world was already on fire, though few in the Midwest could imagine how far those flames would reach. Bong enrolled at Superior State Teachers College, majoring in education, but every spare hour went to the local flying club. He earned his pilot's license on a small Taylorcraft Light, shaky, but fast enough to give him the taste of freedom he would chase for the rest of his life. When the Army Air Corps announced its new aviation cadet program in 1941, Bong's decision was immediate. He packed his gear, left the farm, and reported for training at Rankin Aeronautical Academy in California. His instructors noticed something unusual. Almost instantly, Bong wasn't just talented. He was calm. In mock dogfights, while other cadets yanked their controls and lost altitude, Bong stayed patient. He'd hold fire until his target filled the gun sight, and then fire only once. His precision was unnerving. One instructor later said, "He had a hunter's patience and a mathematician's sense of timing." By the time America entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Bong was already turning heads. General George Kenney, commander of the 5th Air Force, watched Bong's flight review at Hamilton Field and made a note in his log. "Quiet type, excellent reflexes. Keep an eye on this one." Then came the P-38 Lightning, a twin-boom monster unlike anything Bong had flown. Its 2 Allison engines gave it blistering speed, and its nose-mounted cannons delivered brutal accuracy. At first, the plane intimidated even experienced pilots, but not Bong. He felt at home instantly, saying later, "The Lightning didn't want to be tamed. It wanted to be trusted." Within weeks, Bong mastered it so thoroughly that Kenney selected him for deployment to the Southwest Pacific. The farm boy from Poplar was about to face the best pilots Japan could send, and neither side yet understood just how far his legend would go. The Pacific War was unlike anything Richard Bong had trained for. By the time he arrived in Australia, the Japanese Empire stretched across the ocean like a vast steel net. New Guinea, thick jungles, endless rain, and skies filled with death would be his classroom, and survival his only diploma. In the early months of 1942, the Americans were still learning how to fight an enemy that seemed unbeatable in the air. Japanese pilots, veterans of China and the Philippines, flew agile Zero fighters faster to climb, quicker to turn, and flown by men who had spent years perfecting their art. Against them stood young American pilots, green and uncertain, flying machines that were heavier and often outnumbered. Bong's first combat sortie came without warning. He and his squadron, the 9th Fighter Squadron, part of the 49th Fighter Group, were scrambled to intercept a formation of enemy bombers over Buna. It was chaos. The sky turned into a whirling storm of gunfire and sunlight. Bong's heart hammered, but his hands were steady. He had trained for this moment, and it showed. Instead of chasing the Zeros in tight turns, Bong dove from high altitude, using his lightning's weight and speed. His cannon barked twice, short bursts only. A Japanese bomber erupted into flames and plunged into the jungle canopy below, his first kill. But Bong didn't celebrate. He looked down at the smoke curling through the trees and muttered quietly into his oxygen mask, "That's enough for today." To him, combat was never about vengeance or glory. It was about doing the job and bringing his wingmen home alive. His commanders noticed his discipline. In debriefings, Bong described his fights in calm, technical detail, sketching diagrams of angles and energy states. He wasn't improvising, he was calculating, and soon others began to copy his methods. Quick, precise strikes, disengage, climb, re-engage only on advantage. The Japanese, used to opponents who panicked in turning fights, were now facing something new, an enemy who refused to play by their rules. Word spread quickly among Imperial pilots. Beware the twin-boom fighter that attacks from above and disappears. Within 3 months, Bong had 5 confirmed victories, making him an ace. But his letters home remained modest. He wrote to his family, "Don't worry, I'm careful. The trick is not to be brave, just smart." By the year's end, he'd become one of General Kenny's most trusted men, often called on to test new tactics before anyone else dared. And while other pilots celebrated survival with laughter and whiskey, Bong spent his evenings cleaning his guns and reviewing flight logs under a dim tent lamp. He was methodical, humble, and increasingly deadly. But even he couldn't imagine what would come next, a single mission that would make the Japanese Air Force give him a name whispered with fear, the Ghost. By mid-1943, Richard Bong's squadron had been transferred to the thick of the fight the skies over Dobodura and Lae, New Guinea. The Americans were pushing north, and the Japanese air forces were fighting desperately to hold their grip on the island chain. It was here, in one of the most chaotic air battles of the Pacific, that Bong would earn his ghostly reputation. The mission was simple on paper: intercept a large enemy formation heading toward Allied ground positions. But as Bong's formation climbed through the humid layers of cloud, his radar operator called out a warning, "Contacts, multiple, low and fast." When the clouds broke, the sky ahead exploded with sunlight flashing off dozens of enemy planes. The Japanese had sent nearly 20 fighters and bombers to hit the supply fields. Bong had only 8 lightnings with him. The odds were impossible, but he didn't flinch. He radioed to his men, "Stay high, wait for my signal." Then he dove. The twin engines screamed as his P-38 sliced downward at more than 400 miles an hour. The Japanese never saw him coming. His first pass took down a bomber cleanly. The second burst crippled a Zero attempting to climb. He didn't loop or twist, he climbed again, banking hard into the sun to vanish from sight. By the time the enemy regrouped, he was above them again. This hit-and-fade method broke every rule of conventional dogfighting, and it worked. In less than 20 minutes, Bong had personally destroyed 4 enemy aircraft, while his men accounted for several more. But the story didn't end there. One Japanese pilot who survived wrote later in his diary, recovered after the war. He came out of the sun like a spirit. His guns spoke once and were silent. We called him the Ghost because we never saw him twice. Back at base, Bong was silent as usual during debriefing. When his crew congratulated him, He smiled faintly and said only, "We did what we came to do." But word spread quickly through the Allied ranks and even faster through enemy channels. Imperial radio intercepts began referring to a red-tipped twin-boom fighter that struck without warning. That night, General Kenny sent a brief message to 5th Air Force headquarters. "Bong, 4 victories today. Calm as ever. Recommend commendation." The legend of the Ghost of the Pacific had been born. From then on, Japanese pilots were instructed unofficially to disengage immediately if a P-38 with red propeller tips appeared in the area. It wasn't superstition, it was survival. But for Bong, fame brought something else: isolation. He wasn't chasing numbers or glory, he was chasing perfection, and the more he achieved, the heavier the silence became inside him. Because while the war made him famous, it was slowly taking pieces of him he would never get back. Beneath the headlines and medals, Richard Bong remained exactly what he had always been, a quiet, polite Wisconsin farm boy. His fellow pilots admired him, but many couldn't understand him. He never bragged, never raised his voice, and seemed almost embarrassed by the attention his growing victory list brought. At the 49th Fighter Group's airfield, his P-38, christened Marge, became instantly recognizable. Painted on its nose was the smiling face of his sweetheart, Marjorie Vattendahl, a college student back in Superior. He carried her photo everywhere, and between missions, he wrote her letters filled with small talk and quiet affection. "It's warm here, and the mosquitoes still think I'm new. Meet. But I flew today and thought of you the whole time." To the men around him, Bong seemed superhuman in the air, but on the ground, he was endearingly ordinary. He still preferred black coffee and plain sandwiches, cleaned his own weapons, and spent evenings helping mechanics check fuel mixtures and gun calibrations. He insisted on personally cleaning the plexiglass canopy before every mission, saying, "If you can't see clearly, you can't fight clearly." By late 1943, Bong's tally had reached 21 confirmed kills, surpassing every other American fighter pilot in the Pacific. But instead of slowing down, his commanders began to worry. He was too valuable to lose, and General Kenny personally ordered him to stand down for several weeks. Bong protested. "Sir, I'm fine. I still have work to do," Kenny replied. "You've done plenty. We need you alive to teach the others how to survive." So Bong became an instructor once again, but this time his classroom was the front line. He would take young, inexperienced pilots up for mock dogfights and calmly narrate the fight over the radio. "Watch your throttle. Don't pull too early. Let the zero overshoot you. Now roll and dive. That's it. That's how you stay alive." His calm voice saved lives long before his bullets ever did. Even the most nervous rookies said they felt a strange sense of calm flying near him. One recalled, "You could tell Bong was out there. He moved differently, precise, smooth, like the plane was an extension of his thoughts." By early 1944, Bong was the most decorated U.S. pilot in the Pacific, and yet he remained painfully humble. When reporters asked him about his secret, he replied, "There's no secret. I just try to get close enough so I can't miss." But those who knew him understood the truth. Bong's gift wasn't just marksmanship or reflexes, it was awareness. He saw the entire sky like a chessboard, predicting moves before they happened. And while others chased personal glory, Bong quietly carried the weight of every pilot who didn't return. For every kill recorded, there was a name he couldn't forget, and every victory added another ghost to his sky. By the summer of 1944, Richard Bong had become a living legend across the Pacific. His face appeared in newspapers, his name echoed through radio broadcasts, and the men of the 5th Air Force whispered it with pride. Yet to Bong, none of it felt real. Every morning, the war still looked the same jungle haze, the same smell of oil and sweat, the same silence before takeoff. But something had changed. The Japanese pilots who once dominated the skies now flew cautiously, aware that the twin-boom silhouette of the P-38 meant death was near. Bong's tactics had become textbook strategy for every American fighter unit in the Pacific. Hit fast, hit once, and vanish before the enemy could react. By mid-July, Bong's tactic official tally stood at 33 confirmed kills, each one meticulously verified, each one recorded in his quiet handwriting on a small notepad he kept in his flight jacket pocket. He had learned to treat every kill not as triumph, but as mathematics angles, timing, precision. As he told a younger pilot, "If you ever start feeling proud of it, you'll stop coming back." Then came December 1944, the mission that would etch his name permanently into history. That morning, Bong took off from Leyte Airfield in the Philippines for what was supposed to be a routine escort. The weather was clear, and reports indicated a small group of Japanese aircraft operating near San Jose. But when Bong's flight arrived over the target area, the small group turned out to be 20 enemy fighters, most of them Ki-84 Franks, the newest and deadliest aircraft in the Japanese arsenal. The Franks were fast, heavily armed, and flown by elite pilots determined to defend the large, crumbling empire. Even the most experienced Americans feared them. But Bong simply smiled and said over the radio, "Let's get to work, boys." He climbed above the formation, rolled inverted, and dove at 400 miles per hour. The first Frank filled his gun sight for less than 2 seconds before Bong fired a short burst, perfectly aimed. Flames erupted from the enemy's engine. Without breaking formation, Bong throttled up, zoomed back to altitude, and rolled into another dive. Within 3 minutes, he had destroyed 2 more aircraft. As the chaotic dogfight swirled below, Bong's wingman, Captain Thomas Malone, tried to keep up. "He moved like he could see the whole sky," Malone later said. "I'd lose sight of him for a moment, then he'd reappear above me, diving through a wall of tracers." When the battle ended, American radio chatter fell silent. Bong's voice broke through the static. "That's 40. 40 enemy aircraft confirmed destroyed a record that shattered all previous marks." He had surpassed Eddie Rickenbacker's First World War record of 26 victories and every other American ace in the Second World War. Back at base, the men erupted in celebration. Mechanics, cooks, and clerks crowded around his P-38, cheering as he climbed out of the cockpit. Someone handed him a Coca-Cola bottle. Another slapped him on the back, shouting, "You did it, Dick! You're the ace of aces!" But Bong only smiled faintly and said, "There are plenty of other guys out there who did their part. I was just lucky enough to see mine." That humility became his hallmark. While war correspondents begged for interviews, Bong quietly requested another patrol assignment. He didn't want fame. He wanted to finish the job and to bring everyone home alive. General Kenny, however, had other plans. He summoned Bong to headquarters and said, "Son, I'm grounding you." Bong looked stunned. Kenny continued, "You've done enough. You've given us more than any man could. From now on, your job is to go home, marry that girl, and help us win this war from stateside." It wasn't a punishment, it was a rescue. Kenny knew that every time Bong went up, the 5th Air Force held its breath. Losing him would have been a national tragedy. So Bong returned home to the United States not as a soldier, but as a symbol. He had survived 200 combat missions, destroyed 40 Japanese aircraft, and never lost a wingman in battle. And yet, when he stepped off the transport ship in San Francisco, he told the reporters waiting for him, "I'm just glad it's over. I've had enough of killing." When Richard Bong returned to the United States in early 1945, the war in the Pacific was still raging, but the headlines back home were already calling him America's Ace of Aces. Parades were organized in his honor. Schools and factories sent him letters by the thousands. The quiet farm boy from Wisconsin suddenly found himself standing under banners that read, "Welcome home, Major Bong, America's greatest fighter pilot." He was promoted to major, awarded the Medal of Honor by General Douglas MacArthur himself, and greeted by President Franklin D. Roosevelt's representatives as a national hero. But Bong remained exactly who he had always been, humble, polite, and slightly uncomfortable with fame. In public, he smiled for the cameras and spoke softly to the crowds. In private, he confessed to his fiancée, Marjorie Vattendahl, that he felt out of place. They call me a hero, he wrote to her. But I keep thinking of the men who didn't come home. They're the real heroes. After years in tropical combat zones, America felt like another world, the clean streets, the sound of jazz on the radio, the smell of gasoline from passing cars instead of jungle rot and gun oil. For the first time, Bong had to learn how to live without danger. And for a man who had spent years dancing with death in the skies, peace could feel strangely hollow. He married Marjorie on February 10th, 1945, in a small ceremony in Superior, Wisconsin. Reporters filled the church pews, flashing cameras, calling out questions about the war. Bong ignored them all. He only had eyes for her, the same smiling face painted on his P-38, the girl who had waited while he risked everything. Soon after, Bong accepted a position as a test pilot for Lockheed, the company that had built his beloved P-38 Lightning. It was a dream job. He could stay close to the machines he loved, help refine them for the next generation of airmen, and finally live a quiet life with Marjorie. But fate had one final, cruel twist waiting. On August 6th, 1945, the same day the world's first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, Major Richard Bong climbed into the cockpit of a P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. It was a simple polity: acceptance, flight, take off, make a few turns, check the instruments, land. But something went wrong. Just after takeoff from Burbank, California, witnesses saw the P-80's engine flame out. Bong attempted to eject, but the parachute never deployed. The jet plummeted into a residential area, exploding on impact. He was killed instantly. He was 24 years old. As the nation awoke to the news of Hiroshima, another story quietly shared the front page: Major Richard I. Bong, America's greatest ace, killed in jet crash. The irony was haunting. The war that had forged his legend was ending the very day he died. His wife, Marjorie, learned the news from a neighbor while listening to the radio broadcast about the atomic bomb. The celebration turned to mourning in an instant. Across America, flags were lowered to half-mast. General Kenny, his old commander, said quietly, "He was the kind of man we build air forces around." And in Japan, surviving pilots who had once fought him in the skies of New Guinea and later learned of his death with quiet respect. One Japanese veteran later told an interviewer, "We feared him, but we also admired him. He fought with skill and honor." Bong's remains were returned to his hometown of Poplar, Wisconsin, where thousands gathered to pay their respects. His Medal of Honor and Silver Star rested on the flag-draped coffin. Above the funeral procession, a single P-38 Lightning flew over the fields and tipped its wings a silent farewell to the man who had mastered the skies. Decades after his final flight, Major Richard Ira Bong remains a name spoken with reverence among aviators. To historians, he is more than a record holder. He is the embodiment of quiet courage, discipline, and devotion. To his comrades, he was a teacher and protector. And to America, he became a reminder that true heroes often carry their greatness silently. In his hometown of Poplar, Wisconsin, a museum now stands in honor the Richard I. Bong Veterans Historical Center. Inside, his story lives on through worn flight jackets, love letters to Marjorie, and the restored nose art of Marge, the P-38 that carried him into history. School children still visit, their reflections caught in the polished metal of a fighter plane that once roared through Pacific skies. But Bong's legacy isn't measured only in victories, it's in the values he represented. He never sought glory, never let pride cloud his judgment, and never forgot the men who didn't return. Even his final mission as a test pilot showed that his courage was not rooted in war, but in purpose, in pushing the limits of what was possible for those who would come after him. Modern Air Force cadets still study his combat reports. They read the notes he left behind, simple, practical, yet profound. Don't shoot until you're close enough to see his eyes. Never forget the man you're fighting has someone waiting for him, too. Those words, written in the thick of battle, reveal a truth often lost in the roar of engines and the flash of gunfire that even amid the violence of war, humanity can survive in the heart of a single man. Today, when historians debate who was the best pilot of World War II, Bong's name always rises to the top, not just for his 40 aerial victories, but for the integrity behind them. He flew not for fame, but for duty, not to kill, but to protect. And perhaps that's why, nearly a century later, his story still moves us, because Richard Bong's life was a reminder that greatness doesn't shout, it whispers. As one veteran later said, he never looked for the spotlight. He just flew straight, did his job, and came home until he couldn't. Above the clouds where he once fought, the contrails fade, but his name, etched into the sky of history, will never disappear. Major Richard Ira Bong, America's ace of aces, gone too soon, never forgotten.